But welcome to Louisville, and we want you to know that the Human Relations Commission, especially the Advocacy Board, has had a very close working relationship with the command staff of LMPD in the past, and we hope to continue that with you. So without me running my mouth anymore, I'd like to turn the focus on to you.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. I probably fall somewhere between 1 and 2. A little bit crazy, but thoroughly enjoy a challenge. I think, I view it as an absolute privilege to be here in LMPD with LMPD. I think that when I looked at the job and what the city was facing, I knew that my background from, I'm sorry, they've been testing alarms all morning in the building, so that was another one. I knew that my background and my experiences coming from Atlanta and what we'd been through there closely mirrored what had occurred here. I had a fairly good idea of how the department would respond to everything that was going to occur after Breonna's death. And I saw also a number of underlying socioeconomic, racial issues that are also things that we had to routinely navigate in Atlanta. And so I knew I was equipped to do the job. It's been a lift. There's been parts about coming here that have been phenomenal, pleasantly surprising. And then there's been parts to me that are just, I probably wasn't prepared for the full extent of what needed to be navigated. I think what would, to elaborate on that, I would say that I was concerned when I came here that police would not want to work. And that's because that's happening all over the country. Law enforcement agencies are seeing that their officers are very reluctant to be proactive. And proactivity is essential to offsetting crime. The key is, how do you do it? And unfortunately, historically, policing has not done it in a impartial and fair manner, just a fact. And so I knew coming into Louisville, there's a very good likelihood, just given the duration of the protests and how under the microscope that they were, that people may not want to work. And that is going to be a challenge. Pleasantly surprised is I've come in and most everyone here really wants to work. They want to be shown how to do it, what is expected of them, how to go about it. They want to be provided clear direction on how to be a part of the neighborhoods. And so I've found people here really desperate for leadership and direction, but they do want to work. On the negative side, what I wasn't quite as familiar of, and it became very apparent very quickly, and that was if I had not been told about the 9th Street divide, I would have found it out myself the first time I drove there. It was so stark. It was that dramatic. And when I drive around in the West End, where we're trying so desperately we have to make inroads on the violent crime, the lack of opportunity, the lack of investment, the lack of any basis for employment there, it's dramatic. And I think it goes to where a large part of why we're at where we're at today. My goal is to draw attention to that and everyday work to bridge that, because I think that policing to not be what it is, a huge part of that is going to be ensuring that there's some level of financial equity amongst our residents. And I'm not preaching socialism, I'm preaching opportunity. And I think that's a huge challenge in front of myself and in front of Louisville. And it's that challenge is directly tied to how this department has to perform. Um, I really would be interested to know what specifically you would like to hear from me, how I may help you. I mean, I appreciate you having me on, and I don't want to just ramble. I don't know, and I can ramble. So, but I also don't know if there's specific things that you all would like me to address, and I want to make sure I hit on it. I don't want to waste your time. So, thank you.
I submitted a question
Mm-hmm.
latter part of the last week just to kick things off. I'm probably the oldest person on the call. So I grew up in West Louisville, in the Russell and Chickasaw areas. And when I was growing up, I would call what we had was a village. The police officers who patrolled our communities knew our families, knew our names. They knew if one of us got into trouble to take us to our parents or our grandparents before they were arrested, to, intervene in the situation and commit to taking care of the young people and adults as well. My grandfather was kind of his block leader, and he had a very close relationship with the police officers. And down the street was a corner where there was a liquor store, and he knew all the winos, and they respected him. And whenever they got in trouble, officers would bring them up to my grandfather's house and say, "Mr. Glass, we've got some problems here, and this is what he did." And he would say, "Well, he's been a problem and he doesn't want to do right, so take him on, or I'll be happy to work with him and we'll get this problem resolved." So, and a lot of officers lived in the neighborhood too. So, there was a strong sense of community. So that is something that we sorely lack in policing across the country. And I attribute the loss of that to air conditioning in police cars. Because at that point, in the humidity in Louisville, everybody rolled up their windows and stopped yelling out the window at each other and saying hello. And, we need to get back to policing where officers know the people who they are serving. It's really troubling to me and many of us on this call when Dr. Kevin Cosby is stopped and the officer has no idea who he is, that he's a pastor or that he's president of a university. So I think, that's a prime example of not knowing the area where they work. And to me, that is paramount to serving the community as well as decreasing crime. Because if there's a relationship, then people are more comfortable in talking to the police and letting them know where the problem area is and who the bad actors are. But as long as there's this divide and distrust, then we're going to have crime at the level that we have it now. And, my position is everybody needs to work together, community and police. And to me, police are part of the community if they choose to be. But I think it should be a requirement. If you patrol an area, you have to know who the families are that live there, who the
Right.
community leaders are.
Right. No, I don't. I don't disagree with any of that. I think that one of the things I think that there's been a number of factors that have contributed to the disconnect between police and the communities. Certainly, one of them is technology, which I'll roll up in with air conditioning. What we've seen is technology we've gotten people so automated, they often don't have to get out of their cars to even handle the call. They've become so reliant on the technology. And so I think there's absolutely a plus side for it. It can make for greater efficiencies, greater tracking of what a person is doing, i.e. even body worn cameras, because you do need to know what people are doing on a given day. But it has allowed for policing to be done from a distance. I think that you saw in the 90s an enormous emphasis on arrest numbers. We became very data driven in our profession. And because the idea was that if you focused on getting even the petty offenders off the street, you were gonna. It was the broken windows policing. You're focusing on even the smallest of issues to change the trajectory of a location, of a community. And by being really numerically driven, person stopped mattering. What mattered was data and getting arrests, and it became really a focus on the result as opposed to the process. So in other words, why am I arresting them and how am I going about it? It just became, this is how many I had. And so that approach has really done serious damage to our profession. I think that you used to see far more weight in the way of foot beats, and we've gotten away from that. And the reality of it is, when you talk about people knowing the community, you had foot beat officers and and now more recently bike officers. Those individuals still make connections with the community in a manner that someone in a patrol car doesn't. See it all day long, and I'm a huge proponent of foot beat and bike patrol. Where the space, unfortunately, I'm in right now is I'm having trouble just getting enough people to come to work. And I don't say that they're not showing up. I'm saying that so many people have left. We're having a very difficult time hitting bare staffing numbers. And you have to have a certain amount of staffing just to cover the enormous geography that is Louisville Metro. So, but I'm a huge proponent of bikes and foot beat because it does, and people know each other then. There is no reason, there's no excuse for not knowing who Dr. Cosby is, who your leaders are in the community, who council people are in the community. And that's a problem across police departments everywhere. It's not unique to here. And then I think another contributor to it has been when we had the housing developments. I'm finding that Louisville was similar to Atlanta, and many of them were on, it seems like, good real estate. People are displaced without giving thought to the fact that those were communities. It wasn't just real estate, those were communities. And just as people within the community knew one another, the police knew them. And they knew the families. And it really, there was an appropriate thought given at the time that these locations were, torn down or rebranded or what have you. It was the human element wasn't considered. So it's complex, but it's fixable. It's doable. I think what's incumbent upon police is, and what we're trying to establish with newer officers now, I should say newer, is, you've got to talk to people. You've got to look up from your phone. You've got to look up from the mobile terminal you're playing with in the car, and you have to get out and talk to people. And you need to know people, and you need to know who your council people are, who your church leaders are, who the community leaders are, because you're correct. Law enforcement, historically, you always knew these things. Cops knew who the players were in the community. And now there's not that attention on it. It's really been on, again, the end result. What's the arrest? And so we have a lot of work ahead of us. I don't disagree with you, but I also believe my goal is, and I really want to get into a space where I can have the bike officers in particular out there. Because to me, that's the best conduit for talking to people, knowing people, and you can also navigate a fairly sizable amount of a neighborhood pretty quickly.
I agree.
What I see more often, this is Kevin Delahanty, what I see more often these days is police officers sitting in their car, looking at their computer, on their phone, just sitting in their car. Is there any effort to change that? Because the more they're looking at their computer and their phone, sitting, say, at a park or in a parking lot or under a bridge, the less they're communicating or attempting to communicate with the community.
No, you're correct. And I think this is an issue in many departments. I'd say it's more pronounced here because really what you saw was there's a reluctance to interact with the public. There's a reluctance to police for fear that something's going to go sideways. And, it rattles officers when protesters show up in front of their house. It rattles them when they're human beings. And I think there's, for many of them, a real fear of, well, if I engage, especially if I'm proactive and something goes wrong, what's going to happen to me? How am I going to be given a chance to respond? And layered onto that, there was a lot of, you really have a department here that is not, it's very hesitant to go back to what you're saying, to be self-initiated on all fronts. And so it's a very responsive department. And the problem is when you have a very responsive department, you do get homicide rates like this. There has to be a level of engagement before the violence escalates. To your question specifically, that is a supervisory issue. That is a supervisor knowing where their people are and what they're doing. But I'm in a space now that literally there is such hesitancy amongst the rank and file to be engaged that literally I've had to have my top commanders go out there and make arrests to get these folks to get engaged. When there's it doesn't matter what part of town we're in. I'm just saying that there's such a reluctance that something might go sideways. And so I'm not saying that's fair or it's right or it's productive. I'm just saying a lot of what I'm trying to rebuild is a level of confidence amongst the rank and file that you need to be engaged, you need to do your job. Most interactions are going to result in nothing but a conversation. And this is the opportunity to have positive interactions, but it's untraining a lot of that has been hardwired in them in the last number of years. I mean, at some level, the manner in which operations were done within LMPD have been wrong. I mean, they've been inappropriate. So I'm having to simultaneously retrain and also get people back out in the community. But I agree with you, and it's a supervisory issue. And the interesting thing is, to your point, when you're saying they're in the cars and whatnot, because of the technology, you can actually see what someone's doing. So, if you're supervising and you're worth anything, you're going to know what's going on.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be, though, that there's an us against them sort of viewed with police, might be wrong. Mm-hmm. Is there any attempt to try to get, and I know it's difficult for officers to go to the churches or the neighborhood meetings or community gatherings to try to change that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. So the good news is I will say, maybe I'm sure during the protests, there was definitely some sense of us against them, at least along some levels. But I'll say from just a policing standpoint, I've not gotten that. I've not felt that here so much. I feel across the board, there's just a reluctance to police. What I'll say to you is, to me, it's imperative that the officers go to community meetings, they go to church, that they're going to events. What I'm going to tell you has been one of the hardest things for me to overcome since I came here is these things aren't happening. And so traditionally I could go to like different things each day, each night, and meet people and bring with me officers and commanders, and I could expect them to be attending these things in their divisions. But with everything, and yes, maybe it's on Zoom, but it's not, I think it's not gonna, it doesn't have the same impact, especially when you're trying to rebuild relations. So I'm really hopeful with the veil of COVID lifting, you can see more of that, but I fully expect us to be front and center on these events and listening.
Thank you.
Hi, Chief. This is David Allgood. I'm lucky enough to serve on the commission, but also work at the Center for Accessible Living, which is a disability resource center. And prior to 2020, we were providing disability sensitivity and awareness training to all new cadets at the station over on Taylor Boulevard. And I know with COVID, we suspended those, but hopefully we'll be able to initiate those again to try to give all the new cadets a little more awareness of people with disabilities and how some people's, with cerebral palsy might present themselves as being drunk and, made, difficult to communicate, and their gait is affected. So they could be presenting as someone who's drunk or under the influence, but they're not. So we tried to educate about disability awareness, and hopefully we'll be able to continue and keep a dialogue open about some of those issues as well with you all in the training.
No, I thank you, and thank you for doing that. We cannot, we can't do enough in the way of training and educating on whether it's physical disabilities, mental struggles, economic struggles. I'm really hoping with all this dialogue that's finally occurring around police and their treatment of individuals, particularly Black individuals, that we'll finally see some more than anything. I mean, we need to remove police from being the front lines of everything, right? That's just been layered on us for the last 2 decades at least, that we are considered, the primary responders for what clearly are mental health issues or substance abuse issues, or maybe just something completely unrelated. And I finally feel as though some funding is coming forward to maybe help us shore this up. So we're working with a couple of on a couple of programs now that cannot get going fast enough, because I have very real concerns about, I think most interactions that police have go well, but obviously the more interactions you have in the space where someone might have a disability of some sort, there's increased likelihood that the encounter is something's going to go wrong. And so I want to minimize, I think all chiefs do, want to minimize the number of these encounters. One of the things that the University of Louisville is looking at for us now, and I mean, it's going to occur, it just can't occur fast enough, and that's adopting a deflection model. It's based on I believe the original model is called Cahoots out of Eugene, Oregon. And the idea is when 911 calls come in, that you have operators, 911 dispatchers who are trained to ask questions where it appears to be an instance of something other than a true police event. So in other words, dispatchers right now, fire dispatchers, have specialized training because fire requires specialized apparatus depending on the nature of the fire when they respond. So you almost you're adopting that model, but along the lines of more caseworker type or nonprofit type work. And so the 911 calls can be triaged through the training of the 911 call taker. And the end game is that you figure out those calls that you do not need police at all, and you dispatch the caseworker. There may be those calls you need to dispatch the caseworker with the police. Again, just so you can minimize these encounters that we see go horribly wrong across the United States, where police use force in a situation where the person clearly had some other underlying issue.
I think that's the answer, what you said right there. Absolutely. And I appreciate your candor. And like I say, there's been so much turnover. I don't even know who I would approach about this anymore. So if you could maybe give me some guidance as who to approach about trying to be a part of the training for the cadets, or even send it to Dinah, I would be most appreciative.
Sure, I absolutely can. I'll send it to Dinah. That'll be probably the easiest road right now.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Good morning, Chief Fields. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. My name is Christian Dudgeon, and I'm also a commissioner, obviously, on the Advocacy Board. First and foremost, thank you for joining us this morning. I do have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
I know that in our conversation this morning, you touched on different things that you've learned since joining our city, and welcome to Louisville, by the way. You touched on, resident displacement via gentrification in different neighborhoods. We touched on poverty, getting to know the 9th Street divide, the lack of awareness regarding our community residents and leaders. You said yourself there's been a previous reliance and kind of focus on data-driven metrics rather than people-driven policing. And I know that you said one thing that stuck out was you mentioned a reluctance within the force sometimes to interact with the public and a reluctance to police, given all this happened here in the past year. When you say that, though, there are still instances in the very recent past that come to mind that kind of seem to counter that attitude within some officers, perhaps, in LMPD. One that comes to mind instantly is the recent clearing of Jefferson Square, which would happen very tactically, very quickly. It was a concerted effort to remove folks who are normally in that space out, to clear everything out. When I think of instances like that, I ask myself, is there a hesitancy to police, but sometimes not a hesitance to bully residents? And I feel that there are lots of residents in the community who might feel that way and have that experience. Speaking for myself, I have lived all over the city of Louisville in my 26 years. I lived in Shively, I lived in PRP, I lived in Newburgh, I lived downtown for a period of time. I now live in the East End. I've seen all different areas of this city, what culture is like in those areas, what the interaction with those residents and police are. And what I found in my time is that sometimes police attitudes very much vary depending on what you look like and where you live. And so with those things in mind, my question to you first is, while I appreciate, I was talking about foot officers, bike officers, and things like that, what efforts and plans do you have in place, or what plan do you have to directly address the racial bias and prejudice attitudes that exist within LMPD? And then my second question is, what metrics and or policies will be put into place in order to hold our officers accountable? Thank you.
So let me say this. So I think that the goal around Jefferson, listen, one thing that is not being talked about enough in this city, we're talking about a lot of things, but the one thing everyone is sidestepping is the violent crime, okay? And that is the community, the council, the police department, you name it. And it's the media in particular. The violent crime here has to be the priority. I don't want to expend more people handling a park when I've got people getting shot. That being said, I also understand that there are rules around the park, that it's 11 to 7 or 11 to 6 to be cleared out. And yes, we are working to make sure that the rules of the park are adhered to, with the hope of getting people to want to come back downtown to spend money, invest, because at some point there has to be a tax base to drive everything that we're talking about. And right now, as someone who is downtown every day, it is a ghost town. And when I talk to people, regardless of their color, gender, but when they work downtown, they're largely afraid to come downtown. So as a police chief, I know that I have a responsibility to ensure that there's basic, that there's not, that people aren't afraid, right? And so I don't associate people being in Jefferson Square Park with anything being wrong or frightening to people, whatever. Go there, do what you're going to do, but just adhere to the park rules. That's it. So it means no grills, no tents, and no staying overnight. It's pretty straightforward. But no, I don't want to be in the business of dealing with the park day and night with the shootings that we have going on. Trust me. Do I think that police behave differently depending on what a person looks like or where they live? Of course they do. I'm dealing with human beings. I guarantee you that you take policing out of it. Let me just ask you this. Do you feel like you're looked at differently when you walk into Macy's, right? I mean, do you feel like that when you go for a loan application, that you're viewed differently because of how you look, and your opportunities are different because of how you look? This is not unique to policing. Whether it's internal bias or flat out discrimination, it's a human problem, and it's a huge problem. So what I'll say about and I'll be the first person to say that the biggest heartburn and the biggest failure, I think, of policing is we don't police consistently across communities, and that the process we go through differs depending on what community we're policing in. And I think in particular, when you look at communities that are lower income, police become very focused on results, data, the arrests, making the city safe. That's the mindset. Without paying regard to what's the process, how do we get to that end game? Was it fully constitutional? Was it necessary? Did the arrest do far more damage to the relations in the community than the any upside to the arrest in making the community safe? So I don't disagree with you at all on that front. And I think my challenge is, and this isn't every chief's challenge, is making the officers aware of these biases. You can't assume that they know. And what I'll tell you is some people know, and some are just flat out discriminatory. But often these biases, and I say this coming from Atlanta, which was a majority black city, and I had a majority black police department. I would have black officers who had became a part of the culture overrode everything else, the police culture, and they would engage in the same behaviors when policing that the white officers would, and that is too much emphasis on the end result without paying attention to the process and whether, again, it was necessary. So for me, a huge part of my platform is educating cops. It's making them aware of the history of policing in the black community. And that when you go back into history and you see black people being hit with nightsticks by people on horses, who's on the horse? It's the white cop. Or the German Shepherd biting the black person. Who's holding the end of the leash? A white person who's a cop. That's our history. And we're not welcome in a number of black neighborhoods because we've not behaved in a manner that is respectful of the residents. That's our history. And so for me, a huge part of it is education. We do a poor job in America of teaching history, period. We just do a poor job of it, black or white. We don't do well. And so for me, a lot of it is the awareness. It's incorporating and bringing in huge amounts of training along these lines so that folks start to hear it, become aware of it, realize it has to be a part of their thought process. I don't disagree with you at all. And you know, you will see police, especially, and I always go back to, we had in Atlanta, the affluent neighborhood is Buckhead. And I would always say to my officers, what you just did, would it pass the Buckhead test? And what that means is, would you have done the exact same thing in Buckhead, where you know the people up there are going to get an attorney and they're going to hold you accountable? Would you have done it the same way? And if you can't pass the Buckhead test, you shouldn't have done it, or you shouldn't have done it the way you did it. And so I completely agree with you. In terms of how are we measuring it, so about the time I started, the city had retained a company called Hilliard Heinz to do a top-to-bottom review of the department. Fortunately, that report came out right around the time I started. It was huge because you're coming in as an outsider. There's things that I believe, I think are wrong, or I know are wrong, but it's really, and I'll give you an example. And this report's public if any of y'all want to read it. Coming in as an outsider, as someone who's been in policing their whole life, do I think that we in law enforcement, that there are officers who racially profile in traffic stops? Yes. Yes, I do. And those officers may be black or white, but do I think that there is a level of racial profiling and a mindset of like who is going to have drugs or who is going to have guns? Me coming in saying that may resonate positively with some audiences, but there's just as many people out there who are going to say you're full of it. You got nothing to back that up. When I come in and I get handed, not long after I've started, the Hilliard Heinz report, and there's a section dedicated to traffic stops. And what's in there is data showing that in some of the areas that are almost exclusively white, 80% of the traffic stops are in black motorists. That's irrefutable. And the beauty of that, that's data. And that's the data I can take to those audiences who may not agree with me. And I don't have to spend time educating them and convincing them. I just say, this is the data. This is a problem. So the Hilliard Heinz report pointed out a number of deficiencies and made recommendations for LMPD. So it's going through and ensuring, one, that the policies are written appropriately. Usually what you find in law enforcement, most of the time policies are good, but culture trumps policy every time. So what I have to ensure then is that the policies are being adhered to, and that if they're not, we're holding people accountable. And by accountable, I mean discipline. And so I completely agree with you. And we're doing a number of things to try to get us in a path where we can see more data, more real-time productivity, make it public. I'm big on transparency. Let it out there. Trust me. I'm a believer that if something is bad, I want to hit it head on. And I just want to deal with it. I don't want things to languish. And also, if you don't hit it head on and you don't deal with it, it's only right. It's only a snowball. So I think you're spot on. I do think you're spot on. And yes, I'm sure some police are bullies. I don't even refute that. But I also think that what part of the thing that I've had to navigate here is a very huge divide on what Louisville should look like. And for me, all I want is I feel everyone should be safe in their space. And it's really important to me that people, regardless of where they live, are safe in their home. And right now, the reality of it is in parts of the West End, that's not something we're, as police department, we're delivering on. The gun violence is very real. And we really have to get our arms around it.
Thank you, Chief Shields. And, I look forward to seeing what those efforts to educate officers, come into in the future. But specifically, I also hope you touched on, the fact that even today, in some places, officers tend to see their residents as data rather than people. And so in those efforts, I hope that there's a serious focus on undoing some of that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you?
I have, okay, go ahead, Commissioner Gadd.
Okay, sure. Hi, this is Gad. I'm a commissioner. I'm here in Newburgh, and I think what I've seen, to circle back to Kevin's point, with neighborhood associations in the past is that the community engagement with LMPD is really high, like in the 4th and 5th divisions, and not so high in, say, where I live or the West End. And you mentioned that the meetings aren't there, but I would say the meetings are there, but different. You know, they don't take place in monthly meetings, but they're there with park picnics or barbecues or just, out there that are easily accessible. I guess my question is, what can you do to make community engagement more uniform among your divisions?
No, I completely agree. And that is a beautiful little baby. And I can't believe they're not yelling at me. Like, I'm waiting. But I don't disagree. So listen, and you know what? You're right. You have a snapshot of what it was like pre-COVID, and I don't. I fully expect us to be at picnics, us to be at church events, us to be at those events that are non-formalized and non-sanctioned, you know, and it's the pop-up events that you as a cop, you have to go to. And that usually is, not usually, that is a direct reflection of who's running a division and what they expect of their officers. And so if what you're saying is, you know, these things were occurring prior to COVID and we weren't seeing the folks we need to see, that's a clear lack of communication between the division commander, the community, and making sure that the officers are front and center. And I don't, you know, and I appreciate you bringing that up. One of the things that I'm wrestling with is there was not the commanders here, so the folks that are commanders now, and then many of them, they're newer commanders, but the culture here has not been one of exposing the leadership of LMPD to other ways of doing things. And that's really dangerous. You really have to continually allow your employees to be exposed to how other police departments and law enforcement agencies are doing things, how other communities and customer service facing entities are doing things, because you have to improve. And this is not fair to the employees here, but I can tell you, when Colonel Gwynn, who's my number 2 that came from Atlanta with me, when we came in, one of the things that really shocked us was the lack of training exposure afforded to the department to see how things were done elsewhere. So I think that, you know, our goal is to really push that a lot of things be done differently. And I appreciate your feedback. It gives me something to be aware of when we start to open up with something particular.
Chief, this is Brene Goatley, and I'm the Executive Director over at the Human Relations Commission. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you personally, but as we get back into a new normal and start to do these outreach efforts, will you send us your go-to person that we can start connecting them into those type of activities?
Yes. So what I would say, and thank you, Verna, and I would say is, does Diana, is she the one to run stuff through? Yeah, I've learned to pay attention to her emails. She scares me, and so.
Me too.
So the reason I would like her to correspond with me directly is I can't assume that things are going to get done right now. I've got to see that people are actually doing what myself and Colonel Gwynn expect to be done, because we're changing a culture. So I think that if I can get them, it'll allow us to know, okay, even if we can't go, we'll know we need to follow up to make sure that the person who needed to go went. So thank you.
Okay, yes, that's our point person.
Yeah, good.
We have been discussing forming a relationship with the FOP because over the years, as chair of the Advocacy Board, I realized that, you know, we can work with command staff all we want to, and
Yeah.
and achieve some goals, but the culture lies within the FOP. And we've tried to reach out to them in the past with no luck. And this last time, I just made a commitment that we're going to break through, and I made some calls and finally got a response, but I haven't had a chance to really have a discussion. What I would like to do with those guys is get them to understand that using a model of Emmanuel Ocho's Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, to sit down and have these uncomfortable situations so we can break through these gaps in connection and break down the stereotypes between us, because if we don't get to that particular group who have a great amount of influence on street officers, whether we like it or not, no plan is going to work as efficiently as it should.
Yeah.
And we have a group that has committed themselves to meet with them on a hopefully, if we can get started on a regular basis. So, is that something that you think will be helpful in changing the culture?
I think, well, first, I admire your tenacity and not giving up on it. Tenacity on not giving up on it. I think it absolutely is important to do. I can commit to meeting with them, even though I don't often feel that I'm getting much in the way of the results that I'd like to see. But I think it's important to have the dialogue. I think the dialogue is really important. I think one of the things that I've found since being here is they aren't so widely supported within the department, but unfortunately, when they speak, it's assumed they're speaking for the department. And I think that's a real branding issue for LMPD, because I think the damage that the FOP has done seems very pronounced, because I will have to tell you, I don't know that I've gone to any meeting anywhere in this city, and people have just said, what are you going to, this FOP is not, what are you going to do about the FOP? This is a problem. And so I think that at some level, and unfortunately, I think for the rank and file, most people just want to do their job. They don't necessarily want to be involved in day-to-day labor issues. And so they don't prioritize what the FOP is doing without realizing they're actually doing a fair amount of damage to the product of LMPD. I would absolutely encourage you to try to have the dialogue. I think dialogue is important. But, Kentucky's been a tough one. There's a lot of, collective bargaining was not legal in Georgia. And coming here, and clearly it is, and you have many things that are at the state level, empowered by the state level. I think many of the things I've encountered feel like they're written and customized for a small town as opposed to a big city. It's been a different sort of obstacle. But I'm just going to keep hitting away with it, and I'd encourage you to do the same, and maybe one of us will make a little headway.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
And I always make it a personal goal that whenever I encounter an officer at the car wash or the grocery store, and we're in close proximity, that I strike up a conversation with them, just to, talk about their challenges and are just common things.
Right.
And I've heard some tremendous stories from some officers, and others they just kind of look at me side-eyed at a distance. And, I know I immediately identify them as the guys that I need to really break through. So,
if it makes you feel better, they look at me the same way, the same side-eyed. So you're not alone.
Yeah, I'm sure. So if we, we're going to make an effort at them and
Yeah.
see what happens. We're about connecting humans in this city in a positive.
Good. Let's
Chief
commendable.
Shields,
Yes,
this
ma'am.
is Stella Dorsey, and I'm the police ombudsman. I met you briefly at a town hall meeting.
Ma'am.
First of all, let me say that I think it's going to take a lot to get our community back to the point where they actually have a great relationship with the police, or at least trying to improve it.
Sure.
With that, I notice in my role as a community advocate for the community and their efforts to establish justice when it comes to policing them, especially in the western part of the city and the Shively area.
Mm-hmm.
My first question to you is, I guess my first point is that I really like to have a one-on-one meeting with you to find out what your vision is and how you perceive trying to make these changes so that it can be communicated as I go out and do my role. But the question is, how are you all as a department visualizing an incentive to recruit more officers of color?
So the department is, and thank you, the department is well below of where it should be on Black officers. The city's maybe 23% African American, and the department's around 12%. Mm-hmm. And that's not a good space to be, especially since you can't just hire an officer and then have him out in the street in a month. It really is about a year-long process. And so I will say that the previous administration here did this no service to the community and not paying attention to this critical area. So the first thing is ensuring that the officers and the recruiters understand it's a priority. It's not just, oh, we hope it falls on our lap. I'm a firm believer that there are always qualified Black candidates for every job, whatever it is. And you as an employer or a hiree have to be deliberate in your actions to hire the individuals, to give them an opportunity. So for me, it's messaging internally that we are not where we need to be, and we have to do better here. It's ensuring that the people who are the face of recruitment represent diversity. People generally want to see themselves in a recruiter. Mm-hmm. It's ensuring that the civil service entry exam is fair, that it's even applicable to what we're trying to accomplish. And I'm still getting my arms around some of this testing that's been done here, and I have some heartburn on that. It's recruiting from locations where you know that you're going to have the candidates. Are we going to, say, Western Kentucky University? Are we going to the churches in our neighborhoods and talking to the reverends and saying, who in the congregation, maybe someone have a son or daughter that would be interested? It's leveraging, because there's a huge, typically for local law enforcement, your best hotbed for recruiting is your backyard. It's just like sports. And there's absolutely more in the way of effort that we can do there. And it's making the environment for the employees here, the Black employees that are here, feel good about it. How many people are they talking to? I don't want them saying, well, don't come here. You'll be, they'll treat you like crap. You won't get a fair shake. And so I think it's going to be a number of things, but more than anything, it's stating openly the department has to do better in this area. It's failed. And so that is absolutely a priority for us. The difficulty right now is because of all of these self-inflicted wounds that policing have incurred on themselves, people don't want to be a cop. period. And this is across the United States. People don't want a police, black or white, Hispanic, you name it. It is unappealing, the profession. And so we have to rebrand ourselves and make people even want to consider coming into the profession. So that, unfortunately, is the space we're in right now. And it's gonna take a minute to navigate out of it, I'm afraid. And I appreciate this, and I hope I don't want to cut off. I know I've got to go to my 10 o'clock. So if there's anything last thing I have to hit, but I just want to say thank you for letting me be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. I've got a 1013 with a class of students, and I'm excited about being able to tell them that I had a conversation with you. And I failed to introduce myself. I'm Reginald Glass.
Yeah.
So reach out to me as well through Dinah at any time, because we're excited that you're here and we want to support you. And thank you again for your time, and we look forward to having you back again.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any comments before I call for adjournment?
I just want to make you aware about the email I sent out about the upcoming summit on re-imaging public safety. If you got the email, and to register if you're interested in participating in that 2-day summit.
Okay, that summit is today?
18th and 19th.
Oh, yeah, I thought so.
And I'd just like to make the commission aware that effective on the 18th, unless something comes up, we will begin with the Police Merit Board holding in-persons hearings again. And the space is going to be at the fairgrounds. They've secured 3 rooms that they think are adequately spacious enough in order to allow safe distance. So that's going to take place on the 18th.
Great. Okay, then, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And I think we finally got our opportunity to hear the chief. And I don't know about the rest of you. I'm excited about some of the things that she said, and her transparency, especially about the current condition and what her hopes and dreams are for moving forward. So I would encourage each of you to let people in the community know what kind of leader we have and what the challenges are, and encourage people to look at policing as a career opportunity so we can build a more diverse police department. As I said earlier, they can't do it alone. They need us as well. So the community has to be engaged. Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Actually, before we adjourn, Chair Glass and or Rachel, I noticed that today's meeting was recorded. Do you know where that recording will be available later, by any chance?
Dinah's probably recording it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah, and thank you for your questions. I'm, very happy that you're here, and you bring a different perspective to our work, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Always happy to serve and, ask the tough questions. I think she handled it well. I agree, Chair Glass. I appreciate her candor. I did not expect as much transparency. And while I really, really appreciate her vision and some of her goals, I really also look forward to hopefully those things will come into fruition with time. So I hope we get to sit down with her again in the future.
Yes, for real. And, we need to talk to our cohorts in the community because we need them to be on task with us to build a better community. You know, our protests are good, but you know, at some point we need to shift gears and sit down at the table as well as advocate with our constituents about what we all can do together to make the community better. And, you know, if we don't, like she said, we cannot afford to have downtown being a ghost town. Otherwise, our tax base dries up and everybody is impacted by the lack of services as a result of that. So we all have to think big picture, and we all have to get involved in trying to solve these gun violence crimes that are going on. We can't, you know, do not snitch does not work. There are too many young bodies laying out at Green Meadows Cemetery. So with that, I'm going to call for adjournment. We're over 4 minutes overtime now.
All right.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, second. I didn't hear it, but
Nobody wants to leave.
well, I would love to have a casual conversation with you guys because we need to do that. And we'll work on finding a time and a place where we can do that safely, because I think that's important. Sometimes agendas and protocol get in the way of real work. And we did that, I think, a year ago. Well, more than a year ago, we met and just had a social gathering where we could